So, there's been a bit of a whisper circulating in certain circles. The question on the table is whether we should be actively, meaningfully discussing Trevor Lawrence as a legitimate MVP contender for the 2026 season. We're looking at a quarterback coming off a career-defining year in 2025, operating in his second season under the offensive guidance of Liam Cohen, and equipped with an absolutely lethal trio of wide receivers. On paper, he's one of the premier signal callers in the league. And yet, the betting markets and the punditry have him pegged at a mere 0.5 percentage point to take home the hardware. Let me be perfectly clear, I am fully prepared to tell you right now that Trevor Lawrence has, in all likelihood, exactly that, a 0.5% chance of winning the MVP. However, the rationale behind this microscopic probability isn't what you might assume. It's not about his talent, his arm strength, or his decision-making. This is a far more nuanced and, to be honest, fascinating topic. So, before we dive into the weeds, I want to send a quick, fervent plea to the Jacksonville Jaguars faithful out there. Please, I implore you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and, more critically, watch this entire breakdown. When you engage with the full piece, it signals to the algorithm that this content has value. It's not about vanity metrics like chasing empty views or padding subscriber counts for the sake of it. It's about creating a sustainable platform where we can produce in-depth, high-quality analysis on the Jaguars that people genuinely crave. This allows us to maintain the most unbiased, grounded, and honest conversations about this team. Your support makes an immense difference in our ability to do this, and I genuinely appreciate every single one of you who sticks around to the end. Alright, let's get down to brass tacks. The core issue here is a fundamental lack of momentum. In the modern NFL landscape, an MVP candidacy isn't just a reflection of statistical excellence, it's a media-driven narrative that requires substantial, tangible momentum. It demands a constant, buzzing presence in the national conversation. Consider the recent history of the award, or simply the general discourse surrounding it. We saw what Jayden Daniels accomplished in his 2024 campaign. It was impressive, eye-catching, and yet, he was never seriously mentioned in the same breath as the MVP frontrunners. He was effectively invisible in that discussion. Conversely, look at Drake May in his second season with the New England Patriots. Armed with a top-tier coaching staff and solid coordination, he found himself in a fierce, down-to-the-wire battle with Matthew Stafford. Ultimately, he fell short. Stafford, playing with an elite roster, superb coaching, and a stellar receiving core, posted numbers that were objectively brilliant. And the narrative that emerged wasn't about his superior statistics per se, it was a collective sentiment of "it's your turn." It was a media coronation, you are the MVP. It's your time. The established criteria for the award have become incredibly fluid and inconsistent. Take Stafford's Rams team, for instance. They weren't the number 1 seed. They weren't the number 2, 3, or even the 4 seed. We've been traditionally told that the MVP must come from a top-tier team with a top seed. You have to be the top 1 or top 2 seed, was the constant refrain. That's why we can't give it to that quarterback, that's why we have to give it to that one. This fundamental rule was completely disregarded in their case. It simply didn't matter. Then we had the bizarre, reversed situations of 2023 and 2024. In 2023, many argued Josh Allen was the most deserving candidate, while in 2024, the narrative shifted to Lamar Jackson. The result was a swap that seemed to have more to do with narrative momentum than on-field performance. It's a classic case of we see these quarterbacks, we recognize their talent, and we want to give them the award. Patrick Mahomes might be having a down year, but Joe Burrow exploded in 2024, playing out of his mind. He had one of the most statistically impressive seasons in recent memory, given the sheer adversity he faced. But his team didn't make the playoffs, so he was immediately disqualified. However, if his defense had made a few more stops and they'd snuck into the wild card round, would he have been in the MVP conversation? Likely not. The goalposts would have shifted, and the narrative would have been, look at where he is in the standings. It's a pattern that shows no signs of stopping. Even a direct comparison of quarterbacks highlights the arbitrary nature of the selection. One signal caller might have a substantially superior offensive line and a far better defense, while the other has a woeful offensive line, a non-existent running game, and a porous defense, yet still plays out of his mind. It never matters. You can see precisely where the momentum is building. The key is to identify which narratives are gathering steam. Looking ahead to the 2026 season, Trevor Lawrence is facing an uphill battle so steep it's almost vertical. First, let's honestly assess the landscape. It's a field of low-hanging fruit for other quarterbacks. Consider the narratives already in play. We saw the momentum begin for Drake May last year. If he continues that trajectory and has a fantastic season, leading a team to a 1 or 2 seed, putting up excellent numbers with A.J. Brown as a primary target, the narrative is already written. He just came up short last year. Go get that MVP, Drake. Then you have Caleb Williams. He's on the cover of Madden. He's tasked with the resurrection of Chicago, one of the absolute biggest media markets in the sport. If he has a great season, featuring those highlight reel, Heisman-level moments, the momentum will be deafening. And of course, the elephant in the room, Patrick Mahomes returning from injury. Let's just picture the scenario. The Kansas City Chiefs are doing what they always do, winning the division. Mahomes is playing really well, posting top 5 numbers in basic categories like touchdowns and yards. Not world-beating numbers, not record-breaking, but solid, consistent top 5 production. The league and the media will be desperate to award him the MVP. He will have all the momentum in the world. All of it. Even Joe Burrow, who has never won an MVP, is positioned to be a prime beneficiary of this narrative momentum. He'll be facing a relatively light schedule, and his roster should be significantly improved. If he has a strong season and the Bengals are winning games and heading to the playoffs, he becomes a default candidate. Unless someone like Drake May is throwing for 50 touchdowns, something so statistically bonkers you simply cannot ignore it, the conversation will be, it's Joe Burrow's turn. If he's leading the Bengals to a top 2 seed and his numbers are excellent, the media appetite will be overwhelming. It becomes a coronation. Let's get this guy the MVP. We never know when he'll be injured or when the Bengals will fall apart again. This is his window. You see, the media simply has no appetite to create that same narrative for Trevor Lawrence. Think back to the mania we witnessed for Baker Mayfield at the beginning of last season. It was a narrative I vehemently pushed back on, arguing, he is not the MVP. You guys are fabricating this story. But they were working tirelessly, putting in double and triple shifts to manufacture that momentum. They wanted to convince everyone that Baker Mayfield was elevating the Buccaneers to greatness. You could see that energy, that manufactured momentum, on every single broadcast, on every talk show, in every comment section. That is not the energy Trevor Lawrence commands. That is not the energy the Jacksonville Jaguars generate as a franchise. So, the pressing question becomes, what would the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence have to achieve for a genuine MVP candidacy to even be plausible? We already know that just having top-tier stats isn't enough. Because in 2025, he was there. He was top 5 in touchdown passes. He was top 6 in total passing yards. He was top 6 in Pro Football Focus rating. He led the league in touchdown-to-interception ratio. And he accomplished all of this while simultaneously leading the NFL in dropped passes. This is a point I cannot stress enough. He suffered a staggering 10.3% drop rate. For context, Matthew Stafford's drop rate was 6.7%. The disparity is sheer lunacy. If you simply adjust for a more normal drop percentage, Lawrence would have thrown for approximately 4,400 yards. He was also pressured the second most of any quarterback in the league. He had the worst drops and the second highest pressure rate. And he still put up those numbers. That is a phenomenal achievement. And yet, it was barely discussed. It was completely ignored. This is what signals the futility of his case. People were talking ad nauseum about Baker Mayfield. They cited injuries and other excuses for him. Meanwhile, Mayfield's team had 25 drops. Lawrence had 39. That's a monumental, cavernous difference. But we had no problem having those contextual conversations for Baker. In past seasons, we've had them for Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, and even Justin Herbert, who is often the poster child for this kind of excuse-making because his offensive line has been a mess. I understand why those quarterbacks get that momentum. It simply did not exist for Trevor Lawrence. Not even a glimmer. There is no nuance, no context, no additional perspective given to anything Trevor Lawrence accomplished. None. Zero. Consider this, Drake May's team had 13 drops. A drop percentage of 3.5%. Again, Lawrence had 39 drops to May's 13. If you want to gauge perception, just look at the context that is omitted versus the context that is conveniently inserted. How many times did you see a show or listen to a debate discussing the protection issues Lawrence faced, or the oppressive drop rate he had to overcome? And yet, he still managed to perform. If Trevor Lawrence had Drake May's drop rate, he would have been, at worst, top 2 in the league in passing yards. The math might not be exact, but it's not a stretch at all. He likely would have surpassed Matthew Stafford. And his touchdown count of 29, which was 5th, would have certainly increased. If you cut his drops in half, it's not a leap to say he would have gotten at least 2 more touchdowns. That's a conservative estimate. Now you're looking at a quarterback who is top 2 or top 3 in both yards and touchdowns. That increase would, by extension, boost his passer rating. His current rating of about 90 to 91 is artificially deflated. With fewer drops, it would easily eclipse the 100 mark. Combine that with his 9th place ranking in rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns, which likely would have increased as well due to longer drives from more completions, and you have a clear statistical powerhouse. But there was no context. No discussions. None. I know Nick tried to force the conversation, but that's exactly why people laughed. It was a forced narrative, not one that had naturally emerged. Nobody was genuinely thinking Trevor Lawrence was going to win the MVP. There was no serious, authentic argument. So, what would he actually need to do to win it? First, he would not only need Matthew Stafford's numbers from his MVP year, the high completion percentage, the bottom line yardage, the 46 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, and the 109 passer rating. But he would absolutely need the 1 seed. He cannot replicate Stafford's path as the 5 seed. Nope. That won't fly. He has to win his division, and realistically, he has to be the number 1 or 2 seed. If he's the 3 or 4 seed, he's competing against potential narratives for Mahomes, Allen, Jackson, or Herbert. The luxury Stafford had was that none of the quarterbacks ahead of him in the seeding were seen as more valuable. In the AFC, that luxury doesn't exist. If Trevor is the 3 seed, it's likely one of those marquee quarterbacks is ahead of him, generating their own unstoppable momentum. The only positive scenario would be if a perceived lesser quarterback like Bo Nix was the 1 seed, allowing for a narrative based on team success rather than quarterback dominance. But that's a rare scenario. He doesn't have the it's your turn argument. He doesn't have the media momentum argument. So many things are stacked against him. He would have to be the 1 seed, and he would have to absolutely knock it out of the park statistically. And more than that, the conversation would have to shift. It can't just be about winning. We'd need to be hearing, what would it mean if Trevor Lawrence leads the Jaguars to the Super Bowl, or are we starting to believe the Jags can win it all? We'd need to see the media crowning the Jaguars as the best team in the league, just as they did with the Rams. When Stafford lost to the Seahawks, it didn't matter. When he had a terrible game against the Falcons, it didn't matter. Then he beat a last-place Cardinals team and was immediately reinstated as the MVP frontrunner. It was absurd. But that's momentum. That's the power of the conversation. Trevor Lawrence and the Jacksonville Jaguars do not have that luxury. So, that's my perspective. I wanted to break it down because I find these type-driven conversations fascinating. It's not always about X's and O's. Now, I want to turn it over to you. Do you think Trevor Lawrence has a genuine shot at the MVP? Do you agree it's an uphill battle for him to win that award with that 0.5% chance? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one, and I look forward to the discussion. Please consider subscribing to be part of this amazing community, and don't forget to like the video to help with visibility. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.